Hey everyone, I'm Justin Nguyen, and I'm going to be talking about propagule pressure and its ecological role in the context of invasive species. So, propagule pressure refers to the number and frequency of individuals from a species that are introduced into a new environment. It's an important factor in determining whether a species is likely to become invasive. Propagules can take any form, from spores, eggs, seeds, to adults. Basically, any quality of a species is considered when you're counting a propagule. Understanding this concept is critical because high propagule pressure often means that the species has a better chance of surviving and establishing itself in a new environment. It also influences the genetic diversity of a species, which can further affect its ability to adapt to new environments. So, how do we measure propagule pressure? Propagule pressure is determined by two main components, propagule size and number. Propagule size refers to the number of individuals introduced during a single introduction event. If a larger number of individuals are introduced at once, the chances of the species establishing a population are higher. This makes sense because a larger number increases genetic variation and the likelihood of successful reproduction. Propagule number is about how often a species is introduced into a new area, also known as introduction events. Frequent introduction events significantly increase the likelihood that a species will establish itself because the more times a species is introduced in a new environment over time, the more opportunities it has to find suitable conditions for survival and reproduction. So now let's discuss how propagule pressure works in practice. The success of a species establishment in a new environment depends on a variety of factors, including its population size, frequency of introduction events, and environmental changes that occur. One key principle here that you can see from the graph is the positive relationship between higher propagule pressure and higher establishment success. With greater numbers of individuals being introduced, the species has more chances to find suitable habitats. This also helps the species avoid what's known as the Ali effect, a situation or a phenomenon where small population sizes lead to difficulties in finding mates, resulting in lower survival rates. High propagule pressure minimizes this Ali effect as it increases the population size and reproduction success right from the start. In fact, higher propagule pressure can also increase the genetic diversity of a species. Take the example of the cane toads in Australia. They were intentionally introduced in large numbers into frequent events, leading to a large genetically diverse population because it was able to adapt to the rapidly changing environment of Australia, solidifying their invasive success. So now let's look at some examples to illustrate high and low propagule pressure. The lionfish in the Atlantic Ocean exhibits high propagule pressure because of their high propagule number due to the 1980 and 1990 aquarium trade and the high propagule size due to large reproductive output. The lack of natural predators and favorable environmental conditions of the Atlantic Ocean, um, like the warm waters and the abundant food and resources, have allowed the lionfish to spread aggressively, disrupting ecosystems and biodiversity in the Atlantic Ocean. On the other hand, consider the Indian mongoose in the Western United States. Although they're invasive in Jamaica and Fiji, they haven't been as successful in their invasive success in the Western US. This is due to their low propagule number because they're introduced at limited amounts of time in the Western US as an intentional rodent control. They also have a small propagule size due to the small population and the low genetic diversity, and so this meant that as they're introduced, their less than suitable environment that they're introduced in didn't have suitable prey for them to actually be successful in the long term, thus having low propagule pressure. So the impact of ecosystems and biodiversity. So what happens when propagule pressure is high? The ecological impact can be significant. Increased propagule pressure can lead to higher competition among native and non-native species for resources. And invasive species can also introduce new predators or diseases, further stressing the native population. One major consequence of invasive species is genetic dilution, where the gene pool of native species is weakened through interbreeding. These changes can have long-term impacts such as ecosystem disruption and biodiversity loss. For example, invasive species can change the structure of food webs, and without natural predators, their populations can grow unchecked. So we'll be looking at two individual case studies of very popular invasive species of Florida, the Burmese python and the kudzu. A classic case study of high propagule pressure is the Burmese python. The pythons were introduced through the exotic wildlife trade, either through intentional release and or escape from captivity. They were introduced in large numbers across multiple events. Their propagule size, and number were high. Burmese pythons are highly reproductive. Females can lay up to 100 eggs per mate, which means they can produce a large number of offspring. And because of Florida's warm climate and suitable habitat, their population grew rapidly. And you can see the consequences have been severe, with an 87.5% decline in bobcats, 94.1% decline in white-tailed deer, and 98.9% decline in opossums. The Burmese python is a textbook example of how high propagule pressure can lead to drastic ecological changes, disrupting predator and prey dynamics and causing cascading effects through the ecosystem. And now let's look at the kudzu on the East Coast. The plant introduced to the United States in the early 20th century as part of a government program for erosion control. So this was an intentional introduction event. While the intentions weren't to cause harm, there were multiple introduction events with propagule size for each number. Kudzus can grow up to 1 foot per day, quickly establishing a large population in an insanely short amount of time. Their rapid growth allowed it to outcompete native plants by blocking sunlight, and it smothered trees, killing them off. Kudzu also supported very few native insects, making it difficult to eradicate once it has been established. And as you can see from the graph, the kudzu plant overwhelmingly beats all the other flora in terms of how ubiquitous it is in the East Coast. So now, given the ecological challenges posed by propagule pressure, how can we possibly mitigate its impact? First, we can limit intentional introduction events. By restricting the use of non-native species for agriculture and wildlife management, we reduce the chances of a species becoming invasive through introduction events that may be intentional or accidental. We can also strengthen regulations. This includes laws that regulate exotic pet trade, exotic plant trade, ensuring that non-native species are not accidentally or deliberately introduced. Finally, public awareness. Educating people about the risks of introducing invasive species and encouraging responsible behavior can prevent many introduction events from ever happening. And now, to conclude, propagule pressure plays a crucial part in determining whether a species will successfully establish itself in a new environment. Both propagule size and number are important factors that influence this process. High propagule pressure increases the likelihood that a species will become invasive, leading to significant ecological consequences like ecosystem disruptions and biodiversity loss. To address this issue, we can limit introduction events, strengthen regulations, and raise public awareness. Through these efforts, we can help mitigate the ecological impact of invasive species and protect our natural ecosystem. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.